Okay guys, hopefully you found some of that lesson, the example you went through, hopefully you did well with that. If you didn't, you can go back and look at my notes, obviously, on any time you want on the other YouTube. It's Craig A. Reinhardt Gmail. There's no spaces or no capitalizations. CRAIGAREINHARTGMAIL. That's the YouTube channel to which all my videos have been uploaded. So you can go there and search through whatever I got there for lessons. The first lesson was called MCCR 4.2 lesson. This one will be MCCR 4.2 examples. And I am going to do 6 or 7 of them here. We'll see how much time that gets into, but watch which ones you need. If you don't need one, you can skip ahead. So first one we're going to look at is number 2. Number 2 is a pretty standard multiplying polynomials type of problem. So when we look at it here, let's make sure everything's right in the right way, and it is. We're starting here with x squared y cubed and outside the parentheses, and inside the parentheses we've got our x to the 4th minus x squared y squared plus y to the 4th. Okay, my term I'm going to be multiplying to get my answer is that whole thing. There's no pluses or minuses between x and y here, so that's one single term. That's going to get multiplied here, and here, and here. So when we look at that, I'm going to try to write across here as I go so I can kind of scroll down. I'm going to have x squared y cubed, and then I'm going to multiply it by x to the 4th to start. Notice right here you'll see a minus sign at the second term, so I'm going to go ahead and put a minus sign here to take care of that. I'm going to have x squared y cubed times this term right here, x squared y squared. And then finally I'm going to have a plus sign because in front of the y to the 4th there's a plus sign, so I'm going to leave that the way it is. I'm going to have x squared y cubed times y to the 4th. So you can see all the multiplication problems. It ends up only being 3 multiplication problems, but each one of these things looks pretty complicated. So now we're just going to group our like terms together. Remember, x squared and x to the 4th is going to be x to the 6th because we're multiplying here. So x to the 6th, y cubed, because there's a y cubed here, but nowhere else in this term. So that's my whole term right there. My second term is this part right here. So if I look at that, there's going to be a minus sign because of that minus sign. X squared and x squared is x to the 4th because I'm adding them. Y cubed and y squared, add those exponents, and I'm going to get y to the 5th. Then finally, this is my last term right here, plus sign, separates this term from the previous one, and we're going to have x squared y to the 7th. And that would be where I would stop right there, because when you look at it, the exponents are different for the x's and y's. I don't have like an x to the 6 y cubed at the beginning and an x to the 6 y cubed anywhere else in the problem. So this is the simplest version of the answer of number 2. Next one I'm going to skip ahead to is number 5. You're going to find some other ones like number 2 and number 5, so I'm not going to go through all of them because that would be too long of a video, and you wouldn't get a chance to do any of them. My variable here is a t, which can be a little confusing. I did leave it that way because that's one of the expectations, that you can use other variables. You don't have to always use x or y. So 5t plus 4. One thing you want to be careful that that there's a plus sign difference than t, so that will kind of screw things up if you mess it up. I'm going to have 3t, which is my first term, times both of those things. I'm going to have 3t times 5t right here. And then I'm going to have 3t times 4. This is different than the last one because when I look at this, there's a plus sign right here. So plus 3t times 4. That's my 2 3t's. This is different because there's a plus sign in the first set of parentheses. I didn't have that on the other one up there in the corner. There in the corner, my webcam is backwards, so I got to point weird to be able to point to number 2. So since I didn't have that with number 2, it was just multiplying a single term by 3 things. Here I got to multiply my first term, and now I got to go back and do negative 2 times each of these things. Now negative times a positive, in both of these cases is going to give me a negative. So I'm going to put a minus 2 times 5t and minus 2 times 4. Now I can go ahead and simplify each of these terms. Here's the 4 terms. I'd like to kind of separate those a little bit because it makes things a little bit easier when you do those. So simplify them. 15, t and t is t squared, plus 12t minus 10t minus 8. When you look at that now, these two terms are like terms because they both have a t in them. You're going to get that a lot when you're looking at this. This is a very standard thing that you would be multiplying two factors like that together. A lot of times those middle terms, if you're just doing two linear terms, they're always going to be able to combine in some way. So my 15t squared doesn't get touched, but then I'm going to end up with plus 2t, 12, and negative 10, minus 8. And now I'm to a point where I have to stop on number 5 because I can't go any further than that with number 5 at this point. Okay. Next one I'm going to jump ahead to is number 10. And the reason, in my experience, when we start throwing a number in front of there, an extra coefficient, it can be a little confusing. So I wanted to address that. 3 times 2x minus 1, 4x plus 7. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that 3 to the very end of the problem. So when I look at that this way, I'm going to separate this. I can do all this stuff. Look, I pressed the button on my pen here, and that's why it scrolled up. I can separate all of the multiplication problem I'm going to do in here with a bracket. A bracket is just a grouping symbol that kind of stands apart from a parentheses because you know that's going to be bracketing off that whole part. You can do all the stuff you want to on the inside, but that's going to come back to it. So I'm going to ignore the 3 basically until the very end. Not ignoring it, I'm just going to set it aside. 2x times a 4, that is a positive 4. 2x times 7. So when I do those two things, I'm going to 2x times 4x. I'm going to 2x times 7. There's a plus sign here, so I'm going to put a plus sign here. Then I'm going to go back, negative 1 times 4x and negative 1 times 7. So negative 1 times 4x, negative 1 times 7. And that's the end of my bracket. So now I'm going to do exactly what I did in the last problem inside the bracket. I'm just going to save that 3 to the very end here. Like I said, that's a term, that's a term, that's a term, and that's a term. And when you put them all together, we got an 8x squared, 14x, minus 4x, and a minus 7. Just like on the last one, those can go together, so that has to be my next step. Notice my 3 is still hanging out. People sometimes have a tendency to lose that, so just be careful with it. And then we go through and we say 24x squared, because I'm doing 3 times 8, 3 times 10, and 3 times 7. Now it's simplified as much as it possibly can be. Skipping ahead to 14, I picked 14 because when you look at that one, it's got a square in it, which means that we have to do something, but sometimes people forget and lose track of that. I think most people would realize that when you square something, you're multiplying it by itself, but when people say that, they get a little confused at what that actually means sometimes. So what I'm going to do is separate it into making this x squared minus 2y cubed times x squared minus 2y cubed. Now I'm multiplying that term by itself, and it doesn't look like a square anymore. So whenever you have a square or a cube or anything like that, you can separate it to be multiplied by itself, whatever that exponent is. In this case, it's 2. So I can do x squared times x squared to start with because that's my first term. And then I'm going to do that x squared times this negative 2y cubed. So it's x squared times negative 2y cubed, which is why I'm going to put a minus sign out front. Then I'm going to do this guy times here and here for my next part. So negative 2y cubed times x squared, and finally negative 2y cubed times negative 2y cubed. Since this is a negative 2 times a negative 2, I'm going to go ahead and put a plus sign here so I don't get too confused with that later. I know when I do a negative 2y cubed and a negative 2y cubed, I'm going to get a positive 4. So anyway, I'm going to leave it as a plus sign right there. Now you've got your 4 terms again, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I can simplify each of those. At the end, I'll see if I can put anything together. X to the 4th. Can't really do a lot with this, you just can group it and kind of reorder things by the alphabet. And when you look at those two things, that might spark an interest in you a little bit about something that we should do next. Because these two are like terms. They both have an x squared y cubed in them, so they can be put together. And when you do that, to finalize this problem, negative 2, when you're subtracting them, is going to give you negative 4. Notice I didn't change that. This is something people screw up a lot when they're grouping things that have exponents. X squared and x squared. still x squared. Y cubed, still y cubed. So that's why it goes together like that. Then finally, our 4y to the 6th at the end of all that. So that is number 14 on your assignment. I have a 15-minute limit on these videos, so I'm going to do 2 or 3 more depending on how much I got. We're 10 minutes in, so that means that we have to hustle through these. When I look at the next one, I'm going to do is number 17. I picked 17 because there I'm multiplying 2 terms by 3 terms, which is why I'm going to mess with that one. Y plus 2, and then y squared minus 3y plus 4. I'm going to do y, this y, times that whole set of parentheses. I'm going to do 2 times that whole set of parentheses. So I'm going to do y times everything you see in parentheses here. And then I'm going to do plus 2 times everything in this parentheses. So I haven't actually multiplied anything yet. I just separated the y plus 2 and made it 2 different things. Now I can distribute each of those. Y and y squared, y cubed, minus 3y squared, plus 4y. Then I got plus 2y squared, minus 6y, plus 8. Now let's see what we can group together. Y cubed has no like terms. There's nothing else that's cubed on here. 3y squared, negative 3y squared I should say, and 2y squared is going to give me minus y squared. 4y minus 6y is negative 2y, and finally we get the 8 on the end, so that's where we end that problem. 22. We'll see if I can run through both of these that I wanted to do, but if I run out of time again, I'll stop it somewhere along that. 22 I wanted to do because it was a lot like the last one, only a few more complicated steps with more variables and an extra letter in there. We got x and y here, which doesn't make it any different, but just looks a little bit more messy when you're going through it. And there's our question. So I'm going to separate this one. I want you to look at 17 and 22 kind of parallel-like because they're both going to go the same way. I'm going to have x times each of those things in that set of parentheses. And I'm going to have plus 3y times each of those things in that set of parentheses. And again, if I get too fast for you on this one because I'm trying to hurry and finish it up before my time limit, you can always rewind it. I'm going to do x times each of these things. I'm going to do 3y times each of this second set of parentheses here. So 3x squared y minus 18xy squared. And then finally 27y to the third power. I think I've got x squared y right here and x squared y right here. And then I've got right here 9xy squared, 18xy squared. So the things I underlined and the things that I circled are what I'm combining to get these next two terms that I'm writing down. I like to write these in standard form, meaning look at the value of the x variable's exponent, and I kind of make it descend, go down from there. At the same time, you're making y go up. Okay, I am not going to have time to finish number 25, but what I wanted to show you guys is the way to start that one. Because it's cubed, you're actually going to have 3 things. 2x minus 1 times itself needs to be written out like this. And what I'll tell you is it's a lot like the last 2 problems we just did, and what I would do if I were you guys. My first step, and this is where I'll leave you with this one. 2x minus 1, leave that first one alone. And then on the inside here, go ahead and do exactly what you see and what you did on the other one. So if you kind of separate it like that with a bracket like we did on one of the earlier problems, you can still simplify this first with all the multiplication strategies we've been talking about. And then you're going to have a trinomial, meaning 3 terms right there. When you have that, then you go through and multiply this first 2x minus 1 at the end. So do that second. Alright, hopefully this will help you get a good start on that assignment. Again, your total assignment is all the questions on that page. So if you have some additional questions, I'll try to stop up if I can, but I can't guarantee that I will be able to. Hopefully this helped though, and I hope you guys have a good time with finishing those problems. Thanks.